Coming up next, we have Bill Scanlon and Carter Vicky, both working for Wake County. Bill is an open data coordinator, and Carter is a GIS systems and application supervisor. And they're going to be talking about their trek into open data.
Yes.
Wonderful. All right.
I don't want to miss any of my jokes. So while Carter's getting set up, I thought that was awesome, and I know I was running through all of our disclaimers, trying to think of, okay, what did we, so that was awesome. Yeah. That's why I hate following Shannon on anything. Just a quick question. How many people were looking at various disclaimers they have on their websites during that? Because she said it wasn't exciting. I found it terrifying. So in a way that was exciting.
Okay. So we come from a different perspective. We are by no means experts, as Jody and Shannon are, in the legal aspects of this, but we're probably more in the seat that you're in, which is that we spend most of our time, how many of you were at the plenary and did the poll on the different challenges? So the competing priorities, we spend our time addressing those competing priorities, and we spend very little time thinking about this stuff. So this session is actually a great opportunity for us to revisit decisions that are often made and then, left in place for a long period of time. So, in direct response to the click thing, I think it's a really interesting conversation that we should continue having that Shannon opened up, which if you went to any of the usability sessions, one of the first things that we think of in usability is how annoying a click interface is for customers and just how much they complain to us if that's a requirement every time they go to the site. So it's an interesting balance there that we work through. So we do want to talk to you about open data. Show us again how many of you are have an open data site or participating in an open data program. So the licensing and usually we like to talk about the community aspect and the technical aspect of open data because that's what made us join the project in the first place. But we'll start with the licensing and policy since that's what this session is about. And we'll cover more of that than we usually do. And then we'll show you a flavor of the site because we can't resist. When Open Data was initiated as a program at Wake County, Bill Scanlon kicked off a really nice leadership team. And we did go through policy process, which I'll let him talk about. More process than I think GIS folks are used to putting in place. We're doers, right? So we like to dive in and start making stuff and start solving our customers' problems and getting them the data that they like, the superfood that was mentioned in the video at the plenary, right? So this was a real eye-opener for us on policy and licensing discussions. So Bill, talk about our process a little bit.
Yeah, I think the big thing there was we didn't want to overdo it, but we wanted to make sure we understood from our data owners what were the principles we should be including in how we share our data, and how do we tap into all the work that had been done previously. And we'll show later some of the outcome of that. But basically, it was a goal of getting a bunch of people that were the data owners and saying, how do you use your data? How do you collect it? What matters in terms of how you share it? And trying to keep these kind of discussions at the data owner level while we're sharing out information that they create. And what are the different things that we can do to make sure we keep that consistency? And then, of course, we were not the first open data program in North Carolina. Raleigh actually was probably one of the first, and they did a great job. So we were able to leverage the learning from a bunch of different organizations, and then we tapped heavily into the civic tech community to also learn what they wanted. So that was all part of the discussion. And I think the big thing when it talks about sharing data is understanding what the data owner concerns are. That helped inform a lot of what we did.
Absolutely. So we invited departments to first engage whether open data was a fit for Wake County and whether folks were behind it. So, I jumped to the table because, as you all know, GIS has been doing, a lot of the features of open data for a long time, right? So many of the forward-thinking folks who were at Wake County before myself had made the decision to put our data out freely available to folks with no use constraints other than recognizing the kinds of limitations to the data that may be there that Shannon talked about in your disclaimer. So we had a disclaimer that had been reviewed by our attorney, but you were free to use the data, to repackage it in commercial ventures if you saw fit. So we really had a forward-thinking open data policy before open data was a thing, right? I like to say. So the data was out there. It was on an FTP site, though, right? So who's going to find that? The specialists, right? So it was out there for environmental engineers. It was out there for GIS specialists, other government. So we were sharing, but it wasn't particularly accessible to the folks who make up the open data movement.
But we decided to build on that foundation rather than create a new foundation. We built on what was already existing. So we used heavily existing our website disclaimers, our GIS disclaimers for serving data, and then that's where we started. And what we're looking at now, we're kind of the next step, hearing from the community that we work with, is looking at formalizing that with the Creative Commons licensing. So we have this basic disclaimer. We have our website disclaimer that covers how we share data. People were talking about how they had the README text, so we have GIS, we had a lot of stuff, but we also had a lot of non-GIS data out on our FTP servers that we were sharing publicly that just had that README text embedded in the information. So by doing a portal, we were able to bring a lot of that together, but we also are looking now at how can we extend it even further so that not only is the disclaimer intelligible to us, but it's also intelligible to the people that are going to use it. And that's why we're looking at the Creative Commons, and our team decided Creative Commons is the way to go. The question now is we're working with our legal department to make sure they're okay with Creative Commons, and that might take a little time. So I encourage anybody who's thinking about this, look at Creative Commons, but also start talking now to your legal department. It'll make the process easier later. And Carter, I think you can cover how powerful that layering is.
Absolutely. So when I dip back into this to refresh my memory, so Justin Kraft was at Wake County and led a lot of the discussion around licensing and the legal aspects of the program because he has a background in that. But for us, it just was intuitive, it made sense, and it seemed to be the most widely used and understood, which is what we're shooting for, right? Something that's going to make sense to folks, that's, they know what it is. And in fact, what we heard from users, our initial response was, well, we've had this GIS data disclaimer. We have a disclaimer out on our WakeGov website. Isn't that enough? And I think that's an interesting question. Many of you probably have gone through the same thought process. Why take time away from those competing priorities, right, that we always face to dive into the legalese of all these license options? And isn't the disclaimer enough? And what we heard from folks at the open data events was that there was a barrier to use if there wasn't an official license associated with the data. So they didn't feel comfortable, hanging a business on this data if it wasn't explicitly covered by a license. So that's our reason, really. Right. It's always about the users. If a disclaimer is enough, we're not doing this just for the sake of doing it. But the Creative Commons options that are there, and I encourage you to go to the website because it's very well done. And it walks you through the options, but I think the most interesting to me is the machine readable piece of it now. How many of you have done the advanced search on Google Images, right? You're making a presentation like this, and you're looking for licensed content that you can reuse. In fact, the layers right there, I wanted to know that it was okay to use that in this PowerPoint. I don't want to, be in violation of the Creative Commons license. So those are available, free for reuse and modification. And so I felt comfortable putting them into this PowerPoint. So that's a perfect example. And I think as we move forward in open data, not only does the data need to be machine readable, that's an obvious, that's what open data is, but the license also needs to be machine readable so that folks can search and that you make your data more discoverable under the licensing options there. So I thought that was cool.
Right.
And then the human readable, fantastic, right? So, any of you who've read through contracts, are doing a translation as you read it. I'm doing an NDA right now for a data project, and as I read it, I wrote out, okay, what does this really mean in my kind of language, real human language, and the Creative Commons does a really nice job of providing that, and then it has the legal code as well, which you need to associate.
And let me mention with the human readable, I think why this is important in particular for open data is that a lot of we want our citizens to use this data also, and they're going to be turned off by the legalese. But a human readable version of that anyone can read and go, okay, now I understand what their intent is, and I agree with that, that makes it a lot easier for them to feel comfortable in using it. If we just put up a legal code, it might actually turn off some of those people who are simply using it for their homeowners association meeting or for maybe even delivering something to the board where they want to put some information out. And one of our kind of slogans is any data that's not used isn't useful. Like if nobody uses it because we put barriers up between them and using it, then that means putting out the data wasn't a useful act to begin with because nobody's using it. So while we want to keep in mind those protections, and again, we're trying to really keep in mind of those protections, and I'm going to be following up on some of that when I get back to the office. The other part of that is making sure that we also present it in a way that's useful and understandable to the people who want to use it. And if you're a developer looking at building an app, that can be a turnoff if you're just not sure what's going to happen.
So we looked pretty quickly at the various options, and again, our goal is for folks to use the data. So we chose the Creative Commons with attribution, which was, the least restrictive really that we saw in the licenses, and we're open to feedback on this again. So if any of you who are here who know more about this than we do, we're still in the process of moving this forward with our leadership. So this would be a good time for us to know anything that we need to know about it. But
particularly if you've been burned by this in the past, that's definitely
exactly. You should talk to us. Essentially, what we saw for the attribution, though, we even questioned whether we needed to require that because the GIS data has always been available without that requirement. We've never said that you have to attribute. We prefer that you do attribute, but we didn't require it. And so now when we talked about it, we decided that that's really to cover the user. So, as Shannon talked about, there's a lot of various accuracy levels of the different layers that are put together in a GIS, and there's decisions that could be made that wouldn't be prudent to be doing with data that wasn't created for that purpose. And so we're really looping the user back to the source of the data. And we're also saying if you're getting it from another source, we don't have any control over what they may or may not have done a definition query on, or how they're packaging up or have changed that data. So it's looping you back to the source where this is where the data come from, and we're able to tell you the limitations of the data set or any caveats that you should be aware of.
I will say, so our portal also provides the option of creating custom licenses per data set. So right now we don't customize our licensing per data set. We just have the GIS disclaimer and our general website disclaimer. But that's an option as we go forward that we can drill down a little bit further into that. And I think that's going to be a powerful tool as we grow the program, grow the use of open data. But for example, we put out data that's census data, and we just carve it out for Wake County so that people who want to use census data don't have to learn how to use census data. They can just use the data that, and this was a data set GIS had delivered for a very long period of time. So putting it out in a portal, we can customize the license, make it clear we're not the source of that. If the federal government stops producing census data, that's going to affect our ability to deliver it. And I think that's important, and both in the metadata to describe where we're getting it, but also in the licensing to kind of explain the full warranty concept. And this license, by the way, isn't just as simple as, attribute the data. It also covers the warranties that we provide, which are none. So it says we don't warranty the data, we don't warrant. So that's all part of this licensing model to cover a lot of those warranties. So we don't have to be experts in legal concepts. We adopt an existing model, which makes it easier. And I will say one of the things we hear back a lot is the commercial side of open data. In particular, people get a little bit concerned about the commercial use of government data. So one of the examples of that is for Wake County, one of our big wins with open data is Yelp. So how many people have heard of Yelp or use Yelp? So if you go in Wake County, any restaurant, in fact, you plan on eating downtown at all, right? If you go to Yelp, you'll be able to see our restaurant inspection data is embedded inside of Yelp. So if you look up a restaurant, it'll tell you the score that restaurant had, and if you drill into it, it'll show you previous inspections, and it'll show you the details of those inspections. So we thought that's huge, and our environmental health people want people to know that. Like, they want to know more than just what's on the placard, right? They want to know what the specific violation was. But of course, that's a commercial use of our data. We think it's powerful, but some other people might not like it. It turns out the restaurant community actually had no problem with it, because if you're doing well with your restaurant inspection, you want people to know when they're looking at Yelp that that customer that complained about being sick was because they left their food in the car overnight and decided to eat it anyway the next day for lunch, not not that the food was bad, right? That's an important distinction for people. So.
Well, and it's a real part of our philosophy of meeting the customer where they are, right? So, as Bill Greaves likes to say, folks, when they're going out to eat in a restaurant, don't generally start searching the Wake Up website. So we're meeting folks where they are. They're out using these commercial apps, similar to integrations that governments are doing now with Waze, is getting out to folks in multiple and creative ways where they, in the apps that they like to use.
Right. And if anybody is interested in looking at their jurisdiction doing that with Yelp, let me know and I can give you details on how to connect on that.
So we want to talk to you a little bit about the process too, and in particular the way that we looped in folks at the county. So I think when we were looking at those slides in the plenary and talking about how we sort of justify the value of GIS within our organizations, it's about connecting with people, right? So it's the same. It's no different with open data. And people have preconceptions about open data. There's concerns about data sets. I think if they had heard Shannon's presentation, they would be even more concerned about their data sets. So we're in the role of selling this, right? We want folks to see the value in connecting with the community. And some of that is the ability for data sets to get better as they're put out open, right? So we get this fantastic feedback on data sets because who better to know the data in their neighborhood than the folks who live there, right? We don't have a team of folks who, we're lean like anyone else in government. And so we have this wonderful relationship with the community where they're highlighting things in our data sets, they're giving back. So the process is great for that, but it's looping folks in and giving them a comfort level and helping them understand what this community is all about is the Open Data Leadership Team. And it's really about departments. That's a really good question, but at the way that we're set up now, the data, the feedback is coming back, but a data editor who's an employee of the county is making the edit. So they're vetting the feedback. So ultimately, they're still responsible as the employee doing the editing. I hear you in terms of if we were to put out editable feature services and let the public, but we're not there yet. So that's a great point. If we get there, that we would need to follow that step. So very nicely done. Thank you.
I do want to mention, we're going to mention the outcome from the policy group in terms of what was important to us, but one of the things that we really focused on was high value data sets, which so open data is new as a concept, but it's been practiced by government for a while, except for it's not always easy to find it and it's not always easy to access it. So where we grew the open data program was really more along the lines of machine readable data and a catalog. That's where our portal is very useful. So what we did is we actually scoured where we're already sharing our data publicly and brought the most used data sets into our environment. Of course, a lot of that was GIS data, but also permit data, restaurant inspection data. And it did two things for people who are interested in open data. One is we avoided the risk of exposing data that hadn't been vetted because we made a mistake. All of this data has already been vetted and decided that it was public and acceptable to post in the form of an Excel spreadsheet or tabular data or a GIS spatial data set. So that may mean we, in our ignorance of being new to the work, weren't going to make a mistake that killed the program right off the bat. But the other part of it is we were used to dealing with people that also already shared their data and we're used to that public interaction. And so we were able to ramp up a lot of data sets pretty quickly because of that. And also we know they're used because people are already using them. So with that, so we took an exercise. We used Sunlight Foundation and we used the Federal Open Data Program as our tools for this. They have a lot of different components of what makes up a good open data program. I'm also really lazy. So I joke, I don't even like doing work once, much less twice. But when people have already done a lot of great work, harness that, right? You guys probably do that more than anybody. GIS is fantastic for using the work done by other people and then making it their own. And there's a quote I love that's associated with Picasso, and it's, good artists copy, great artists steal. And the difference is when you steal something, you know the value, and you make it yours, right? And so anyway, so we use this is an example of a output from that process where we use the open data program from the federal government, and they have 7 principles of open data. And we just simply discuss, well, first of all, how important do we think those are? That's this scale. But also, in our organization, culturally, how hard is that going to be for us to do? Because we were looking for low-hanging fruit, quick wins, things we can get done. And so this basically just plotted that. And by the way, the size of the circle is how much we disagreed on it, right? So number 7 here is managed post-release, and that was a point of contact must be designated to assist with data use and to respond to complaints. We just weren't sure how important that was going to be. And we had a lot of disagreement on it. But as we went through, we started picking them, and then we said, okay, well, first of all, it's public. We have to default to open, that acknowledging this as public data is a big first step. And then that it's accessible, that it's made available in convenient, modifiable, and open formats. And then this one here, which was a little more difficult but is important, was that open data are described fully. So we decided quality over quantity. Let's get out data that we're going to recognize that all our data is public data that's not protected by law, but let's get started on data that we know will be of high value. Let's describe it well. Let's put it out in a format that can be accessed by a lot of people. And so anyway, this was just an example of how that policy group kind of vetted the principles. And this is an example of all the different places we were already sharing data. This is our FTP server. I mean, come here and find what you're looking for was basically what we were telling. Of course, nobody did that. And I actually drilled down. Some of these were empty. So what would happen is we'd shared a couple times, and then there was no need, and we just stopped doing it. And there was where the data was really old, right? So it's really hard to maintain that environment, right?
And one of the principles that's worked really well for us in terms of putting a data set into the open data site is that we don't do it until we have an automated update process, right? So some folks, when open data first started, they just started like, putting a lot of information into an open data site, and that is one approach. But what we wanted was for the data to be reliable over time, and so for folks to know that when they went there, they weren't going to get data that was last updated in 2012. That the data has an update cycle, and so I think I see Ben Strauss out there on my team, and he does a lot of the hard Python work behind the scenes to make that happen. And he also does a lot of Bill referred to a lot of the spreadsheets that were out there, and I call those not yet GIS data kinds of data sets. So he's done a lot of the work to show folks that those are actually data sets that can be geo-enabled and look at the interesting patterns that you can see once you do that. So,
I also want to just give a plug for GIS in general, which is the program we have would not have been ramped up as quickly. So we're using Esri as our data portal. One reason is because we already owned it, so there's no additional cost for the county. But I, as an open data coordinator in our IT group, have access to an existing maintenance group that's sharp, knows their stuff, and is able to do stuff that I can't do and ramp up quickly, right? So that provides me with kind of a maintenance environment that makes my job a lot easier. If we had gone with another product, we'd have to build that whole infrastructure. I also say GIS is one of the areas where we had our data under management already, which again makes it so much easier to share it.
So we're short on time, but I do want to make sure that I show you a couple slides about our new portal, which also Ben has done a lot of work to refresh, and just continue to talk about, this is a legal session, and it has been really eye-opening for us. We do have a couple of discussions to have back at the office based on Shannon's presentation. So that's great for us, and Jody's input as well. But the focus is the data, and the focus is the community for us, right? So we are out at community events. We encourage you to do the same. So I think 2 years ago when we presented on open data here, I had some really good questions from the audience about GIS folks saying, I don't know if I have a place at the open data events. You know, I'm a GIS person, and they seem to be really heavy on the programming and the stickers on the laptops, and I'm not sure I'm cool enough to be, you know, like, and I felt the same way, right, when I went too. It was, you know, but I think that there's a real value in going and listening and really hearing what this community is looking for. They bring so much to the table in terms of ideation, innovation, helping us make our language that we use to describe our data sets more human-centered. We use a lot of, you know, acronyms and specialized technology words in GIS, and so they help smooth that out.
And these are actually 2 events. Highly recommend if you live in the Triangle that you attend, no matter what your role. And the other thing I want to mention in terms of community is so often in government we think there's government and then there's community. And the reality is the government is part of the community. If we do it right, we're part of the community. And so that's kind of our approach to open data in relation to the community. It's not we go and we speak at their events. No, we're part of that community. So we're in the mix. We're pitching apps. We're helping to build apps, help to understand what the goals are. So there's a lot of process there.
Yeah, here's the team, you know, we get involved, but our role is to help other folks be successful, right? So this was a team that put together at City Camp here, put together an open data portal for Wake Forest. And I jumped in, it was like, you were doing a cool thing over there. You know, they had the whole site designed by the end of the day. So we federated the site into the Wake County site to show, when they did their presentation, to show just how easy that was to do. And when you federate data into the Wake County site, you're alleviating the pain for the customer of having, you know, if they happen to be on the Wake County site, they don't want to have to hop around to several more sites for municipalities. They'll find the data there, and vice versa. If you're on the Wake Forest site and you want the parcels, you know, we call it jurisdictional fatigue. Folks don't want to have to know who manages what. So we're alleviating that, we're participating, and most importantly, we're listening when we're out at events.
Check out NC Open Pass for the open data events in this area. So, and we're out of time,
Absolutely.
I think. We'll be available for questions, and I can give you a business card and things like that if you have more questions.
Thank you, Bill and Carter.